on CNN today, monster storm, a powerful hurricane, is making a beeline for the U.S. East Coast.
Strategic bond, Moscow pivots east, conducting large-scale war games with China.
And defying the odds will take you to a coral reef that is thriving in warm waters.
Hurricane flags are now flying along America's southeast coast as Hurricane Florence marches westward towards the Carolinas.
We want to show you how Hurricane Florence looks from space. Experts are describing the Category 4 storm as extremely dangerous. 1.5 million coastal residents in the Carolinas and Virginia have been ordered to evacuate, and many are already on the road.
Here's Florence's position in the Atlantic right now. Less than 1,500 kilometers east-southeast of Cape Fear, yes, Cape Fear, which is in North Carolina, packing winds well over 200 kilometers an hour. And from Washington to Charleston, top officials all have the same message.
They haven't seen anything like what's coming at us in 25, 30 years, maybe ever. So I would say everybody should get at it.
Even if you've ridden out storms before, this one is different. Don't bet your life on riding out a monster.
This is a massive, powerful, destructive, devastating beast, and it is headed right at us.
Hurricane Florence is posing several serious threats to America's East Coast. More than 20 million people live in areas the hurricane is likely to impact, and officials are warning of massive damages, not only to areas right on the coast, but even to inland states.
The powerful storm surges along the coast up to 5 meters, and long periods of heavy rain could cause massive flooding. The more it stalls, the more it rains. Now, many Carolina residents heeding warnings to evacuate. CNN's Martin Savage in Carolina Beach, North Carolina, with the very latest. A lot of heating, some are not, apparently. What have you been seeing today?
It's kind of a mixed message. Hello, Michael and Amara. As far as people heeding the evacuation order, there is a mandatory evacuation order in effect here in Carolina Beach. I should point out to your viewers that even though it is mandatory, it doesn't mean that everybody leaves. Essentially, if you own property, if you're on that property, then law enforcement cannot kick you off of that property. Let me just show you this. This is the main road out of town. There is one bridge at the end of this long road, and that connects it to the mainland. This is a barrier island. Thereby, it's very vulnerable. And you can see it isn't bumper-to-bumper traffic. It isn't like people are trying to drive out of here in mass numbers. They have been leaving, but there are a lot of people who haven't left yet. Let me just show you some of the other scenes that you can see here in this community. You know, this is how people prepare, and it's pretty tried and true in any hurricane-prone area, and that is the boarding up of windows. It's basically you want to fortify the outside of the building. The problem they're going to have here is not so much the wind. There will be plenty of that. They're going to have a real problem with flooding here. In fact, it's possible that in this particular section, this is aptly known as North Lake Street, that they could have 9 feet, roughly, what is that, 3 meters of water that they're going to be facing on this particular area and through much of the downtown area. And that is a primary problem. It's going to be a combination of storm surge. It's also going to be a combination of just all the amount of rain, because the storm may stall on the coast, and as a result of that, that would be problematic. So there's fortifying on the outside, and then there's kind of fortifying on the inside, which is what some of these people are doing. It isn't that they're all just choosing to drink to get rid of their problems. Many of these people are locals, and a lot of them will leave. They still have 24 hours. This is a farewell party, and they're basically saying goodbye to friends, and they're trying to encourage some others that, hey, maybe you ought to come with us. Because this is truly a historic storm for this part of North Carolina. In fact, the last time they may have seen anything close to this would have been back in 1954, which means most of those here didn't see it. And if this does go to a Category 5, then they've never seen anything like it here. And the structures here are pretty old, and whether they could withstand the combination of tide, wind, and surf, well, that's what they're up against. So that's why law enforcement is saying, if you aren't out of here by 8 o'clock tomorrow evening, Eastern Time, you are on your own. And the problem will be, there is no one coming to help you for perhaps days And they even say it could be weeks without power and without help. It's a pretty dire situation.
It's a stark warning. And we're so glad, Martin, that you mentioned those people behind you, because they didn't look like they were that concerned, but
Fortifying their insides.
Yeah, exactly. Fortifying their insides and then getting ready to leave. Martin Savage, we appreciate your reporting. Thank you.
3 meters of water in that
is
street.
frightening to imagine.
Scary, isn't it?
Well, let's talk more about Hurricane Florence and turn out to meteorologist Jennifer Gray, who's covered a hurricane or two.
And that's not even talking about the rain. That's just the storm surge. So you're going to have rain on top of that. We could see historic amounts of rain. And this area has already very saturated. They've already had one of their wettest years on record for parts of North Carolina. So any additional rain is just going to be a lot of trouble for this area. So let's talk about Florence, because it is one of many storms brewing in the Atlantic. It is a very, very busy season. It's almost like a light switch went on, because we had essentially nothing or not much for weeks in the first few months of hurricane season, and now things really starting to ramp up with Hurricane Florence. Very, very strong. 220 kilometer per hour winds with gusts of 270, moving to the west-northwest at 27 kilometers per hour, which is very, very fast for an Atlantic storm. So on this path, it is expected to remain at Category 4. It is going to strengthen more before making landfall. And then the problem is, once it makes landfall, it is going to slow down significantly. And so we're talking about days and days of rain over the eastern portion of the United States. We have hurricane warnings already in place, and those go far inland, as well as hurricane watches, tropical storm warnings as well. And here is the flash flood risk. We have a high risk across much of North Carolina, southern Virginia, and it extends out from there. So a lot of people have been comparing this storm to Hugo in 1989. The problem with that is there's been a 25% population increase since Hugo. Both storms very powerful, but each storm is very different. And so this one could even have more impacts than that one did. Let's take a quick trip over to the Pacific, because very, very busy as well. Both oceans very busy, and we also have about 5 or 6 lined up here. Main Cut, of course, the one that we've been talking about the last couple of days. This one is barreling to the west, much more powerful than Florence. And this is new, our new tropical storm here, but it's going to be absorbed by a front, so we're not too worried about that one. We're worried about this monster right here with winds of 260 kilometers per hour, gusts of 315, moving to the west at 26. Now, this also could strengthen a little more before it makes landfall. So here are the forecast models, and you can see that storm just barreling over northern sections of the Philippines. Still some deviation in that track of whether it will make an actual landfall in a very mountainous area. So we'll be very concerned about landslides, mudslides there before making landfall around Hong Kong, maybe a little bit to its south. So here's the latest track. Possibly making a brush with the northern Philippines, about 240 kilometers per hour, and then by the time it meets Hong Kong or areas south, it will have 140 kilometer per hour winds. So still another powerful storm, Amber and Michael, to deal with in the Pacific that will disrupt travel and cause a lot of rainfall.
That's a very busy map out there, isn't it?
It is, and that storm is massive when you look at it on the radar. Thank you so much, Jen Gray.
Thanks, Jen.
Well, Russia has now launched massive war